going? I wanted to make a quick video on this 1972 Yamaha DT2, specifically regarding ignition and the auto loop system. Now, this bike had sat for 6 years before I got my hands on it. As you can see, it's stripped down. I was having problems with electrical in general. Specifically, I was not getting any spark. So I decided to strip the whole bike and start from scratch. Now, I really want to touch on specifically the timing, but as well the auto loop system, which is very imperative for first start. Now, I've read a lot of tutorials, all sorts of DIY stuff. I've seen stuff online that says you need to do 2.6 millimeters before top for correct timing. According to the manual, you're supposed to take the head off entirely and then check the depth of the piston to the deck. That is absolutely ridiculous. I've never dealt with that myself, timing a two-stroke. I'm used to timing on a mark. The manual doesn't very specifically state anything about this here mark, but if you look in the parts diagram, there's this special tab attached to one of the coils inside the stator. That is your timing mark. I'll try to get some better light on it. Let me just quickly grab my drill. Maybe you guys can see it in there. So there's this tab right here, right below the points. And what's supposed to happen is that line is supposed to match up with this red mark on the stator. At this point, when those two are aligned, the points should begin to open. The problem I was having is that although I followed the tutorials and the guides and the manual, every time I timed it according to the tutorials I had seen, if you can see here, my Sharpie point, according to the spec sheets I was following, my timing was retarded. I started digging into a lot of forums to find out that this mark actually means something, and it has to align with this bracket that's hanging off of this coil down there right below the points. When you have that set properly, the timing is correct. It's very simple. All I did was I hooked up a pretty cheap multimeter to this lead here. This is the whip off of the stator. This is your solid black, not to be confused with this other short cable that also comes out of the whip, comes out of the main head, black cable. Now, as you can see, I have it wired temporarily to a breaker so that I can safely test this bike. Pretty straightforward. One lead goes to the coil feed right here. The other lead comes back around and to the harness from the stator. Really simple. Now, to test when your points are opening, rather than using a buzz box or a light, which I didn't find to be very helpful at all, I used a simple multimeter. Pretty straightforward. One end tied to the whip off of the magneto, one end tied to ground. When the points are closed, I was getting a consistent 1.6 ohm resistance across the leads. Pretty simple. As you turn this, make sure your points are clean and everything. We'll assume that's obvious. Once you're turning this, when this point aligns with this little bracket in there, the points should begin to open. You will see a change in the resistance on the multimeter. It slowly creeps up, so don't get excited. It slowly creeps up from 1.6 on my meter. Yours might be slightly different, but 1.6 hits the tab, points open. As slow as you can, turn this 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, and a few degrees later, you're going to see 2.9 to 3. That means the points are fully open. Once you see the resistance change when you're hooked up, that's when you know your points are opening. Now, this bike sat for 6 years before I had started it. I got fresh, proper plugs, B8 ES. The other imperative thing is to bleed your auto loop system. If yours is intact, I highly recommend keeping it. Here's the auto loop system. It's pretty straightforward. There's one feed line that runs to the tank, right there, the bottom of the tank. That is feeding the pump. This little hose is going into the cylinder. That's what's pumping the oil into the tank. The cylinder. Now, it's very imperative that you bleed this. First, fill your tank with oil. To bleed this is quite simple. Pull this Phillips head, let it gravity bleed. If you need to speed it up, you can simply open the throttle. As you can see, I'm opening the throttle. The throttle splits into two right here. One goes down to the carburetor slide. The other lead goes to this pump. This is why these pumps are very important. Now I have the throttle all the way open, and if you want to quickly bleed the system, you can rotate this gear manually, and this pump will move up and down. That will allow some oil to pass through here if you're having a hard time bleeding it. Mine, I just cracked it open. Might have had some residual in it, but it came right through. And when you run the engine primarily, you want to see the pump moving. The pump is relative to engine speed, which you'll see this turning. I left everything open on first start. You'll see this turning. And as you increase the throttle, the depth of the plunger that, pushes the oil into the crank varies depending on your throttle position. So it's a very good system. I highly recommend you leave it alone. Do not bypass it if it works. There is a proper procedure for measuring how much this pumps. My exhaust smoked, so I left it as is. I do believe it's pumping a little bit too much. I will get to that later, but I just wanted to make sure it ran, and it did. It started second kick after 6 years. All I did was prime this. I have a leaking petcock, so unfortunately I didn't get to put the tank on, but I took some line. I filled this up, make sure the bowl was full. I hit my ignition. I wired my points up after I set the proper timing and cleaned my points. And in 2 kicks, it fired up. So if you're having trouble, you don't want to go out and get a dial, take off the head, whatever, none of that nonsense. Just make sure you line up this mark to the tab that's in there. You will see it. You can't miss it. That is the correct timing on these bikes. Very straightforward. You don't need any special tools. Thank you, and good luck.